My name is Lily. I was born into a family full of love and laughter. My earliest memories were of my mother brushing my hair in the morning while singing songs that made my heart feel warm. My father, Andrew, was a strong and caring man. He worked hard, but he always made time to read me bedtime stories and walk with me in the garden behind our house. We did not live in a mansion or drive expensive cars, but felt like the richest girl in the world. My mother was gentle and kind. She cooked delicious meals and always made sure I felt seen and heard. I never imagined that kind of happiness could disappear in the blink of an eye. When I turned 12, everything began to change. My mother started coughing a lot. At first, we thought it was just a cold, but weeks passed and she grew weaker. The doctor came to our house more often. My father looked worried all the time. He tried to keep things normal for me, but I could see through his fake smiles. One night, I sat by my mother's bed, and she reached out to hold my hand. Her fingers were cold and fragile. She told me that no matter what happened, I had to stay strong and kind. I cried and begged her not to leave me. She just smiled sadly. The next morning, I woke up and found my father sitting by her bed with tears in his eyes. My mother had passed away in her sleep. My world shattered in that moment. I lost the only person who understood me completely. The days after her funeral were filled with silence. Our home, which once echoed with laughter, now felt like an empty shell. My father buried himself in work. He barely spoke and often returned home late. I tried to be brave, but I missed my mother every second. I stopped smiling. I stopped singing. I started to eat less and cry more. I used to curl up in her old shawl at night just to feel close to her. For months, I lived like that, quietly mourning without anyone to talk to. Then one day, my father told me he had met someone. Her name was Cindy. He said she was kind and smart, and he hoped I would like her. At first, I did not know how to feel. Part of me was angry that he could move on so fast. Another part of me wanted someone to care for me again. When I met Cindy, she wore a bright red dress and gave me a box of chocolates. She smiled a lot and said she always wanted a daughter. My father looked so hopeful. I nodded and tried to smile back. I wanted him to be happy, even if my heart was still broken. Cindy moved in a few weeks later, and everything seemed okay in the beginning. She cooked dinner with me and braided my hair like my mother used to. She laughed at my jokes and asked me about school. For a moment, I thought maybe we could be a family again. But things changed when my father was not around. Cindy changed completely the moment my father left the house. Her soft voice turned sharp and cold. Her eyes that once seemed gentle now looked at me with irritation. She stopped calling me sweet names and started ordering me around like a servant. Lily, clean the kitchen. Lily, fold the laundry. Lily, you are so useless. At first, I thought she was just stressed. Maybe it was hard for her to adjust to. But then she started locking the fridge. She said food was not for lazy children. I often went to bed hungry, listening to my stomach growl through the night. I tried to tell my father. I really did. But every time he came home, Cindy would smile and act like everything was perfect. She served him tea. She kissed my forehead. She complimented my grades in front of him. And he believed every word. I wanted to scream and tell him what she really did when he was gone. But I knew he would not believe me. I saw the way he looked at her, like she had saved him from his sadness. I did not want to take that away from him. So I kept quiet. I learned to survive. I woke up earlier than anyone to clean the house. I stayed out of her way as much as possible. When she yelled, I nodded. When she hit the table, I looked down. I became invisible in my own home. Every time I heard my father's car outside, I felt relief. For those few hours, Cindy was sweet again. She baked cookies and asked me to sit beside her on the couch. It was a game to her, a performance. Years passed like that. Silence, suffering. My smile became something I wore like a mask. People at school thought I was shy, but I was just broken. I never invited friends over. I was ashamed of the lies I lived in. One day my father came home coughing. He said it was nothing, but the cough got worse every day. Cindy acted concerned in front of him, but I saw the way she rolled her eyes behind his back. I started taking care of him. I brought him warm soup. I helped him walk to the bathroom. I sat with him when he could not sleep. Cindy rarely entered the room, unless visitors came. Then she became the grieving wife. Eventually, my father stopped going to work. He stayed in bed most days. One night I sat beside him, and he reached for my hand. He whispered that he was sorry for not being around more, that he loved me more than anything. I cried silently. He asked me to promise that I would always be brave. I nodded and held his hand tightly. The next morning he was gone, just like my mother, peacefully, quietly, leaving me behind again. His funeral was small. Cindy cried loudly in front of everyone. She wore black and held a handkerchief dramatically. I stood in silence, holding back the storm inside me. After the guests left, she looked at me with pure hatred. She said now that he was gone, I was nothing but a burden. I told her I had nowhere to go. She said that was not her problem. She gave me a black trash bag filled with my clothes. No money, no kind words, no sympathy, just a command to leave and never come back. I walked out of the house that once held all my memories. The door slammed behind me. I stood in the cold, holding that bag of broken pieces of my life, alone, abandoned, betrayed. I walked for hours that day, with no idea where to go. My legs felt weak and my chest was heavy. I had no relatives, no friends who could take me in. I passed houses with warm lights and families eating dinner together. My stomach ached from hunger. I sat on a bench in the park and hugged my bag tightly. Night came and the air turned cold. I curled up in a corner near a bus stop and tried to sleep. But the ground was hard and the noise of the city never stopped. I cried quietly, afraid of everything and everyone. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of cars and footsteps. People walked past me like I was invisible. I was nothing more than another lost face in the city. I tried to find food in trash bins behind restaurants. I felt ashamed, but I had no choice. I found half a sandwich and ate it like it was a feast. For days I wandered the streets. I found abandoned buildings and alleys where I could sleep at night. I tried to stay near public places where I felt a little safer. One afternoon I saw a boy near a train station, shouting headlines and holding newspapers. People gave him coins and took the papers. I watched him for a long time. He looked younger than me, but full of energy. I finally walked up to him and asked how he got the job. He pointed to a man sitting behind a small wooden booth. I approached the man and told him I needed work. He looked at me for a moment, then handed me a small stack of newspapers. He said if I sold them all, I would get a share. I stood near the entrance and tried to copy what the boy had done. At first, no one stopped. I was too quiet, too timid, but I forced myself to speak louder, to smile, to look people in the eye. Slowly, a few stopped. Some gave me coins without taking the paper. Others just nodded politely. By the end of the day, I had enough to buy a small loaf of bread and a bottle of water. I sat behind the station and ate every bite with tears in my eyes. I had earned it. With my voice, with my will. From that day forward, I returned every morning. Rain or shine, cold or hot, I stood there selling newspapers with every ounce of strength I had. I memorized the faces of kind people who smiled at me. I avoided the angry ones who shouted for no reason. I saved every coin in a small tin. I hid under a broken crate. I learned to stretch every dollar. I bought second-hand clothes and old shoes from thrift stores. I washed my face in public restrooms and combed my hair with a plastic fork I found. I did everything to keep some dignity. Other kids laughed and played. I worked and survived. I watched families holding hands and couples, walking dogs, while I counted change in the dark. I never stole. I never begged. I held on to the one thing I had left, my pride. One evening, the sky turned dark earlier than usual, and rain poured like a waterfall. I tried to shield the newspapers with a piece of cardboard, but it was useless. The wind blew hard and my clothes were soaked within minutes. I stood there shivering, clutching the wet papers to my chest. People rushed past me holding umbrellas, never stopping. Just when I thought I would collapse, a black car pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down and a man looked at me with concern in his eyes. He asked if I was alone. I hesitated, but nodded slowly. He stepped out of the car and walked toward me. He looked wealthy but kind. His coat was long and expensive, and his shoes shined despite the rain. He asked why a girl my age was standing alone in such weather. I told him I sold newspapers. He asked if I had a home. I did not answer. He handed me a business card and said if I needed help to come to his office. Then he handed me a folded $100 bill and told me to get something warm to eat. I stood frozen as he returned to his car and drove away. That night, I bought a bowl of hot soup and a dry jacket from a nearby thrift store. I stared at the card in my hand for hours. It said, Thomas W. Bennett, president of Bennett Industries. I had no idea who he really was, but I never forgot his voice. The next morning I went to the address. The building was tall, with glass windows and guards at the entrance. I thought they would send me away, but when I showed the card, they let me in. I waited in a fancy lobby until Mr. Bennett came down to meet me himself. He smiled when he saw me and invited me to his office. I sat in a chair with wet shoes and torn jeans while he offered me tea and sandwiches. I ate slowly, not knowing what to say. He asked me about my life. I told him everything, from my mother's death to my father's illness to the woman who threw me away. He listened carefully, never interrupting. When I finished, he leaned forward and said he and his wife had no children. They always wanted a daughter. He said he saw strength in me and offered to take care of me. I could not believe what I was hearing. A part of me wanted to run. Another part wanted to cry. But deep inside, I felt a flicker of hope. I said yes. He arranged everything legally. A social worker approved it. I moved into a home with warm, lights, clean beds, and a woman who hugged me like a real mother. They gave me new clothes, a private tutor, and my own room painted in my favorite color. For the first time in years, I felt safe. I felt human again. Mr. Bennett told me I could become anything I wanted, that the past did not define me. I made a promise to myself that day. I would never go back to being that girl on the street. I would rise. I would grow. And one day, I would face the woman who tried to break me. The first few nights on the streets were the hardest. I had no idea where to sleep, how to find food, or how to stay warm. The city was loud, unforgiving, and full of people who looked right through me as if I did not exist. I sat under a broken billboard near a convenience store, hugging my knees and trying to stay awake, so no one would steal my bag, which contained nothing but a notebook and a photo of my parents. I woke up one morning with my stomach growling louder than the traffic. My throat was dry, and my limbs were stiff from the cold pavement. I stood up and walked until my feet hurt. My shoes were worn out, my clothes dirty, and my heart aching with every step. I saw people my age walking to school laughing with their friends, while I searched for leftover food in garbage bins. The shame was unbearable, but the hunger was worse. One afternoon, I saw a man selling newspapers on the corner. He looked tired but focused, calling out headlines to the people passing by. I stood there for a long time, watching how he folded the papers, how he shouted with energy, how he collected coins from strangers. When he noticed me, he asked if I was lost. I shook my head and asked if I could help him. He looked at me for a long moment, then handed me a bundle of old papers and said, "Try selling these and we will see." That day, I made my first few coins. It was not much, but to me it felt like a fortune. I bought a small piece of bread and a bottle of water. That night, I slept behind the same store, but this time with a full stomach and a flicker of hope in my chest. I returned to the man every day. His name was Marco, and he became the first kind person I met after being thrown away. He never asked too many questions, but he taught me how to survive. how to smile even when life was cruel. Months passed, and I became one of the regular newspaper sellers on the block. People started to recognize me. Some gave me extra coins, some ignored me, and some even asked about my story. I always smiled and said I was working hard to build a better life. Deep down, I promised myself that I would never become bitter, never become like Cindy who chose cruelty over compassion. I saved every coin. I could hiding them in a tin box, under a loose brick by the alley. I refused to beg. I sold papers rain or shine. I learned to wash my clothes in public bathrooms, dry them in the sun, and sew torn seams with thread I found in trash bins. I read the discarded papers I sold, and slowly began to understand the world. Politics, business, real estate, finance. I read it all and kept it in my head like gold. One rainy evening, while I stood shivering under a plastic sheet, a black car stopped near my corner. The window rolled down, and an elderly man in a sharp suit looked at me. He asked how long I had been selling newspapers. I told him honestly, almost a year. He looked surprised. He asked why I was not in school. I hesitated, but replied that life had different plans for me. He stared for a moment, then said, "Come with me if you want a real chance." I was hesitant. Fear wrapped around my spine like chains. But something in his voice, something in his eyes told me he was not like the others. I climbed into the car, soaked and shaking. He offered me a towel and asked my name. I said, "Lily." He introduced himself as Mr. Donovan, a retired businessman with no children and a large estate that felt empty without laughter or family. He said he had watched me from his office window for months. He admired my persistence, my discipline, my refusal to beg. He said I reminded him of his late daughter, who died young but full of dreams. He offered to take me in not as a worker, but as his own child. I could not speak for a moment. Tears ran down my face as I nodded, unable to believe that kindness had found me again. That night I slept in a warm bed for the first time in a year. Clean sheets, soft pillows, and the smell of lavender surrounded me. I cried until I fell asleep, overwhelmed by the silence, the safety, and the fact that someone saw value in me again. The next morning, I woke up to breakfast on the table and clothes in the closet. Mr. Donovan said I could start school next week. Tutors would help me catch up. He even gave me a journal and told me to write my dreams in it. For the first time since my father died, I felt human again. Not forgotten, not abandoned. Just Lily, a girl with a second chance. As months turned into years, I transformed. I studied hard, made new friends, and learned everything I could. Mr. Donovan treated me like a real daughter, attending school events, buying me books, listening to my ideas. He encouraged me to believe that I could run a company, own a business, and make a difference in the world. He even took me to meetings, introduced me to investors, and asked for my thoughts. By the time I turned 20, I was no longer the girl under the billboard. I was the adopted daughter of a respected businessman, with a sharp mind, a strong will, and a heart that remembered every bruise, every hunger pain, and every cruel word from my past. I never forgot Cindy. I never forgot how it felt to be thrown out like trash. But I had something stronger than revenge. I had growth. I had power. And soon, the world would turn in ways no one expected. I started to learn about business from Mr. Bennett. He took me to his company on weekends and let me observe meetings. I watched how he made decisions, how he treated his employees with fairness and respect. He explained contracts, budgets, strategies, and leadership. At first, it felt overwhelming, but I wrote everything down and studied every night. I asked questions, and he answered with patience. He told me that knowledge was power, and I should never let anyone make me feel small again. When I turned 18, I started working part-time at the company. I began in the customer service department and slowly moved into operations. I learned about every part of the business, from shipping to marketing. I worked hard and never expected special treatment. Mr. Bennett always said, the best leaders start from the bottom. My co-workers respected me, not because of my name, but because of my discipline. I saved most of my salary and lived modestly, even though I could afford more. I remembered the days when I had nothing, and I never wanted to take anything for granted. Mrs. Bennett taught me how to host formal events, how to speak in public, and how to carry myself with elegance. She helped me pick dresses for company, galas, and taught me how to use the right fork at dinner. She also reminded me to stay humble, to treat everyone with kindness, no matter their position. I never told her every detail of my past, but she knew enough to understand my journey. She hugged me often and told me I was a miracle. I always smiled and thanked her, but deep inside, I still carried the weight of my childhood. Years passed, and I finished college with honors. I majored in business and specialized in entrepreneurship. Mr. Bennett said he would soon retire and wanted me to take over one of his branches. I was shocked but grateful. I had grown into a confident young woman with a strong voice and a calm mind. I started attending leadership conferences and mentoring younger girls who had difficult lives. I told them their pain did not define them and that scars could become strength. Despite all my success, I never forgot the girl who slept under benches and begged for leftover bread. I never forgot the rain-soaked clothes or the hunger that twisted my stomach for days. And I never forgot Cindy, her voice, her hatred, her betrayal. But I also never let her name poison my joy. I moved forward, but I kept the memory alive, not for revenge, but for purpose. Then one day, fate brought her back into my life in the most unexpected way. One afternoon, Mr. Bennett and I attended a community outreach event organized by one of our partner charities. The event offered food counseling and job placement services to struggling individuals. I walked among the booths, smiling and greeting, people listening to their stories and offering encouragement. I loved events like this because they reminded me how far I had come and how important it was to give back. Then I saw her. She was standing in line near the back, holding a clipboard with shaking hands. Her clothes were wrinkled, her hair was messy, and her shoes were falling apart. I knew that face, even though it had aged and lost all its pride. Cindy, my former stepmother, the woman who threw me into the streets without mercy. I froze for a moment, unsure of what to feel. Pity, anger, confusion. She had not seen me yet. She was talking to a volunteer who pointed her toward the booth for job applications. I stayed hidden behind one of the tents and watched her from a distance. She looked tired and lost, nothing like the woman who once strutted around in expensive dresses and designer heels. I asked a staff member discreetly if he had any information about her. He said she had applied for food assistance and basic employment support. Apparently, she had lost her home after years of unpaid debt. Her business had failed, and no one in her social circle had helped her. She had burned too many bridges. Now she was just another forgotten name on a long list of desperate applicants. I felt no joy in seeing her like that, but I also felt no sadness. It was as if all the emotions I once carried had emptied out. I was simply a witness to the fall of someone who once held power over me. I did not speak to her that day. I returned to the office with a silent storm building in my chest. That night, I stared at my bedroom ceiling, wondering if this was the moment I had waited for, not to punish her, but to show her who I had become. The next week, our human resources team began reviewing applicants for new cleaning and maintenance positions at the office. The department needed staff for a newly renovated wings, and I was assigned to approve the final list. When I opened the file, I saw her name, Cindy Harper. She had applied to be a cleaner. She had listed no recent job experience, and her references were outdated. But I knew what she was capable of. I approved her name without hesitation. I told the team to treat her like any other hire. No special instructions, no alerts, I wanted her to see me on her own terms, to realize where she now stood and where I had risen, not out of revenge, but out of justice. On her first day of work, Cindy arrived at the building early in the morning. She wore a faded grey uniform and held a small bag with cleaning supplies. She kept her head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone. I watched her from my office window as she walked nervously through the lobby. She looked fragile, almost invisible. No one recognized her, not that they had reason to. To the world, she was just another employee. To me, she was the ghost of a past that no longer haunted me. I did not approach her that day. I let her settle into the job, cleaning floors, emptying trash bins, and wiping down glass panels. She worked hard and silently. Some of the staff noticed how she avoided conversation and how her hands trembled when she worked near others. I wondered if she recognized the company name or if she had any idea who ran this building. My name was on every wall, but perhaps she never thought the girl she abandoned could rise so far. 2 weeks passed before we finally came face to face. I entered the lounge area after a meeting, and she was there cleaning tables. She turned around slowly and our eyes met. For a moment, her expression was blank. Then her mouth fell open, and her eyes widened with disbelief. She dropped the cloth in her hand and took a step back. I stood still, calm, composed, and waited for her to speak. "Lily," she whispered, as if saying my name burned her throat. I did not respond. I simply nodded and picked up a folder from the counter. Her hand shook as she bent to pick up the cloth again. I could see the confusion flooding her face. She looked at my dress, my heels, the badge on my chest. She was realizing the truth, that the child she threw into the streets was now her employer. She opened her mouth again, but no words came. I walked past her without a word, not out of cruelty, but out of peace. I had said everything I needed to say through the life I built. Her presence in the building did not affect my mood, my routine, or my power. She was just another name on payroll, another lesson written in silence. That night, she waited near the parking lot as I walked to my car. She stepped forward with tears in her eyes and asked for a moment. Her voice cracked as she spoke. She said she was sorry. She said life had been unkind to her, and she never expected to fall so low. She asked if I could forgive her, if I could show her kindness despite everything. I looked at her and remembered every cold night, every empty stomach, every cruel word. But I also remembered the people who helped me, the lessons. I learned the strength I gained. I told her I forgave her, but I would never forget. I said forgiveness was for me, not for her. Then I walked away, leaving her standing in the shadows of a world she never thought I could reach. On her first day of work, Cindy arrived at the building early in the morning. She wore a faded grey uniform and held a small bag with cleaning supplies. She kept her head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone. I watched her from my office window as she walked nervously through the lobby. She looked fragile, almost invisible. No one recognized her, not that they had reason to. To the world, she was just another employee. To me, she was the ghost of a past that no longer haunted me. I did not approach her that day. I let her settle into the job, cleaning floors, emptying trash bins, and wiping down glass panels. She worked hard and silently. Some of the staff noticed how she avoided conversation and how her hands trembled when she worked near others. I wondered if she recognized the company name or if she had any idea who ran this building. My name was on every wall, but perhaps she never thought the girl she abandoned could rise so far. 2 weeks passed before we finally came face to face. I entered the lounge area after a meeting, and she was there cleaning tables. She turned around slowly and our eyes met. For a moment, her expression was blank. Then her mouth fell open, and her eyes widened with disbelief. She dropped the cloth in her hand and took a step back. I stood still, calm, composed, and waited for her to speak. "Lily," she whispered, as if saying my name burned her throat. I did not respond. I simply nodded and picked up a folder from the counter. Her hand shook as she bent to pick up the cloth again. I could see the confusion flooding her face. She looked at my dress, my heels the badge on my chest. She was realizing the truth, that the child she threw into the streets was now her employer. She opened her mouth again, but no words came. I walked past her without a word, not out of cruelty, but out of peace. I had said everything I needed to say through the life I built. Her presence in the building did not affect my mood, my routine, or my power. She was just another name on payroll, another lesson written in silence. That night, she waited near the parking lot as I walked to my car. She stepped forward with tears in her eyes and asked for a moment. Her voice cracked as she spoke. She said she was sorry. She said life had been unkind to her, and she never expected to fall so low. She asked if I could forgive her, if I could show her kindness despite everything. I looked at her and remembered every cold night, every empty stomach, every cruel word. But I also remembered the people who helped me, the lessons. I learned the strength I gained. I told her I forgave her, but I would never forget. I said forgiveness was for me, not for her. Then I walked away, leaving her standing in the shadows of a world she never thought I could reach. Years passed, and life continued to move forward. The company grew across the country with branches in major cities and thousands of employees. I was invited to speak at conferences, share my story on talk shows, and inspire young girls from broken homes. People saw me as a symbol of resilience, but deep down, remained that same girl who once stood in the rain, selling newspapers with empty pockets and a broken heart. One spring afternoon, I stood on the balcony of my home, overlooking the city skyline. The air was warm, the sky painted with soft pink and orange hues. I thought of my father and how he used to lift me on his shoulders when I was small. I remembered his laughter, his strength, his love. I wondered what he would say if he could see me now. Would he be proud? Would he apologize for not seeing through the mask that Cindy wore? Would he regret leaving me unprotected? I had long stopped asking why life unfolded the way it did. Pain was no longer my enemy. It was my fuel. Every cruel word, every slammed door, every empty plate was a brick in the foundation of my strength. I built my life not in spite of my past, but because of it. The world had tried to bury me, but I grew roots in the dirt and climbed to the light. Cindy eventually retired from the company, quietly, without a party, without farewells. One day she was there, and the next she was gone. My assistant said she left a note at the front desk thanking the company for changing her life. No one ever found out who she truly was to me. I made sure of that. Her secret remained buried beneath the weight of time. I never sought revenge in the way people expect. I never screamed or ruined her name. My revenge was success. My revenge was kindness. My revenge was becoming everything she told me I could never be. I forgave her not for her sake, but for mine, because carrying hate would have chained me to the past, and I was meant to fly. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I closed my eyes and breathed in the silence. I was no longer the abandoned girl. I was Lily, a woman who turned her scars into armor, a soul who rose from the ashes without asking for permission. And that was enough. That was everything.